you could be breaking any law at any time, and based on who is in power, they can choose to arbitrarily apply those laws. There are too many laws. The average citizen cannot even keep track of what they are abiding by and what they are breaking. And that's certainly the case with our gun laws in Connecticut.
Welcome to Lock and Load Podcast. My name is Josh.
And I'm Michelle.
And we talk to you about Connecticut 2A issues. So today, our special guest is State Senator Ryan Fazio from the 36th District, who is running for governor of Connecticut. So Ryan, why don't you give us a little bio about yourself, and then we're going to dive on into all these questions.
Well, thanks for having me, Josh and Michelle. It's a pleasure to be with you all. My name is Ryan Fazio. I was born and raised in Connecticut. I spent most of my career in the private sector, working in energy and agriculture and shipping. But in 2020, I started looking at the state that is my home and became extraordinarily disillusioned with the state of our state leadership. Basically, they've raised the cost of living. They've taken away so many of our rights and freedoms as citizens. And I thought, if I wanted a job done better, that I should do it myself. So I'm just someone who had no connection to politics, no family, no friends or neighbors in politics, but stepped up, got off my couch and ran for the state Senate because I thought, if this is a state that's worth saving, that's worth fighting for, and our home is always worth fighting for. So I've been in the Senate now for 5 years. I focused especially on issues related to cost of living in the state economy. Energy issues, I've probably been the most vocal advocate in Connecticut for eliminating the public benefits charge and cutting electric rates. I've been a major advocate for cutting taxes and protecting our budget guardrails and keeping government size limited. And now I'm running for governor because I think if we are going to change the state of the state, that we need a change in leadership at the top.
That's awesome. That is absolutely awesome. That's a huge change.
Did you do any local counter city politics beforehand? Or
I was on the RTM in my hometown of Greenwich for a couple of years, and I've volunteered. I spent probably most of my adult life volunteering more than anything. I wasn't really involved in government or politics. I spent 7 years as a volunteer tutor in inner city charter schools. I spent 3 years volunteering for Meals on Wheels, delivering meals to seniors. And I was a writer on public policy issues for the New York Post, City Journal, for the Federalist. And, those were really my involvement in the community, not so much in politics or campaigns until I ran for office myself.
So you didn't help volunteer or anything for campaigns in your area, or did you?
The first campaign I ever volunteered on was in 2018 for Joe Markley's lieutenant governor campaign. Oh. It's funny, there's for instance, Pam Salamone is someone from not too far from here who's on my campaign, and she was my point of contact when I was just handing out Joe's literature at the polls and primary election day. And now she's working on my campaign for governor. So
that's really cool.
Listen, it's a great state, but we need a change, and that's what it's been all about.
Were you at the Marriott in Rocky Hill on election night?
Well, I probably wasn't invited. It was too lowly.
I was there.
I just didn't know what was going on.
The first time I ran into Matt Corey actually was there.
Yeah, 8 years. 8 years ago, I had no idea what was going on here, and here we are.
That's awesome. That's what it takes, though. That's what. That we talk about getting involved and how you can make changes. You have to get involved. And it's awesome to see you putting your feet where your mouth is and wanting to make that difference. That's awesome.
Yeah. And that's what I tell people who are interested, especially who are younger, in their 20s and so on. You have no idea how quickly, your involvement can make a difference. Locally. Put yourself out there, take a risk. You will be grateful that you did, because you can make more of a difference as an individual than you could possibly imagine.
No, fantastic. Awesome. Yeah. Absolutely.
You're 100% true. We talked and started this setup at Samson's kickoff fundraiser.
Yeah.
For that perfect example, I was not into politics at all. Paid attention to politics because of, these issues and stuff, but ran for Southington Town Council and won this year. First time doing anything in politics, and, little baby step, not at the state level, but
give it a few years.
We're holding Southington down.
We'll be in different seats.
Yeah, maybe.
And see, I've worked on tons of campaigns and I'm on my RTC, but that's as far as I've gone. I haven't gone any further.
I tell her to. All right. We have a ton of questions to go through. We'll get through as many as we can. The whole variety for the listeners, for the viewers at home. We will get to gun issues because that's what we focus on. Yep. But we're going to talk about like policy issues too, because obviously those are important when running for governor. And we'll talk about elections in the state Senate and the House, and all that good stuff. So I guess Michelle and I will go back and forth on questions. Sure. And you want to start off with the first one?
Sure. So the first question we have for you is, what made this the right moment for you to run for governor?
Well, I've been proud of my record and my service in the state Senate. I'm in my third term, and I've been one of the most vocal advocates in the state for change, for reducing cost of living, electric bills, and taxes, for protecting our individual rights and freedoms as citizens and the public safety. And I've been able to win repeatedly in a Democrat-leaning district, in spite of all the odds, in spite of more money being thrown against me than any state Senate candidate in state history. But in order for this state to see a real change and the type of leadership it deserves, it's going to need a change at the top. And, you know, I think I've bumped up against the upward limit of what I can achieve in a state Senate where Democrats have a 2-to-1 majority. I'm proud of what I've been able to pass, incrementally improving regulations to make them less costly and protecting local control of decision making. But as long as we have a 2-to-1 Democratic majority in the state legislature and a Democratic governor who kowtows to the left constantly, we're not going to get the type of leadership that we need in the states. It's the same exact reason I ran for the state Senate in the first place, that I believe this is a great state with a horrible state government, but that with a positive change in leadership at the top, that our state can flourish like never before. And so that's why I'm running for governor, because I think that our state deserves a better class of leadership.
Just to reiterate, you don't come from a family of politicians.
Like, no one.
You deciding that you needed to make a change.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. My great-grandfather, who is, I think, the son of Czech immigrants, he ran for city council in Yonkers, and I have his paraphernalia from the 60s, and obviously got crushed. He was a Republican in Yonkers. But no, there's no Fazio family involvement in politics ever at all. This is, really just, my interest and initiative and love of state and love of country and, desire to be involved and make a difference. And here we are.
That's great. That's great.
What's something that voters normally don't hear on the campaign trail that you want to share?
I've always really just been so deeply interested in policy and government and how good policy and government can make people's lives better, freer. And I've always had just a deeply held love of our country and felt so lucky to be an American, to be part of this great inheritance that we have as Americans of a free country where our rights are protected in our founding documents and where we have the privilege of living in the wealthiest and most powerful nation on earth. And my desire to be involved in state politics is because I think that protecting that inheritance as Americans is an important responsibility that we have today. And in Connecticut, I think we've been failed by our leadership for decades now. And there's no way to make the change that we need and deserve as Americans and as Connecticut residents unless you yourself step up and make some sort of contribution one way or the other.
So going back actually to the previous question, you said that your grandfather was an immigrant? Great-grandfather?
My great-grandfathers were immigrants, yes.
Okay. Where'd they come from?
Italy. I'm a quarter Czech and a quarter Irish too. Okay. So, both of my paternal great-grandfathers were immigrants from southern Italy. Fazio is Sicilian.
Yep.
And there's not a lot of Sicilians in Connecticut. It's interesting kind of learning about, from different obviously countries where from individual towns, they went to individual towns here in the United States, but the Sicilians really went to New York.
Yes.
And so my family is mostly a New York family, Queens, Yonkers. And Carmelo Fazio 100 years ago came over to Queens and with a couple dollars in his pocket and was basically a day laborer. And my grandfather was a construction worker. And, my parents moved up from Philly and Yonkers, where they're from, to Connecticut. And, raised a family, and I'm very fortunate to be from the family that I'm from, because they're good, hardworking people, faithful people, and I'm very lucky to be their son and grandson.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Okay. How has living and working in Connecticut shaped your political views?
It's a good question. I've just watched so many friends, family, and neighbors who are good people, smart people, hardworking, leave the state. And the state's a great place with good people, strong communities, and really so many wonderful qualities about it that make it a desirable place to live. And yet, so many good people that I've grown up around and that I've come to know have left our state. And, part of this project of trying to change Connecticut is so that we don't have that again.
Well, that's what they say. The best business in Connecticut is moving companies.
That's right.
Because they're just leaving in droves, which should be a clue, but unfortunately not all are seeing it.
That's exactly right. People vote with their feet, and they've been leaving Connecticut for many years and still are. And Governor Lamont set the standard for himself when he ran for the first time and ran for re-election. He said, we're going to turn the moving vans around. Well, just a couple of weeks ago, a new study from U-Haul, the famous moving van company, came out, and Connecticut was identified as one of the 5 or 10 worst states for out-migration. People are still leaving. Our net domestic migration, so excluding immigrants, is still negative because more people are leaving. More American citizens are leaving Connecticut than coming to Connecticut. And so that's by his own standard, by this governor's own standard, he has failed. And so I don't think we need a third term of more of the same. Right. When the moving vans continue to go in the wrong direction, we need a change in leadership so that the moving vans can turn back around.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So one of the biggest talking points that we've seen on social media is that you're from the Fairfield County. And people will say they don't need another governor who's out of touch with middle and lower class in Connecticut. What do you say to that?
I guess they haven't seen my house. I live in a 2-bedroom, 900 square foot house, me and my fiance. It's expensive to live in this state. And, we have to, watch our spending to make ends meet. And that's the same exact case for millions of middle class and working class people all across Connecticut. I think my house could fit in the governor's garage, but I'm not critical of anyone in the state because of their station in life or because where they live. I want to bring people together in this state. I want people to vote for me, whether they're from Windham County or Fairfield County, Litchfield County or New London County, and anywhere in between. We need to bring people together. And as Republicans, we already have the odds stacked against us. So I'm not going to belittle or neg anyone based on where they live. I want your vote. I want your support, no matter where you're from or what your station in life is, because I think we can all agree that Connecticut deserves better, and it's time for a change in our state.
I love that. That was a great answer.
It really was.
When you picture Connecticut in 4 years, what do you see if you're governor, when you're governor?
Running for re-election.
Yeah. After a term of the Fazio administration, you'll see the moving vans turn around. You'll see jobs come to Connecticut. You'll see investment in Connecticut. You'll see incomes rising and cost of living falling. And that is a standard I want to be held to when I run for re-election too. I'm not going to be like this governor or previous governors who will make promises and forget about them when they're running for a second, or in this case, a third term. Hold me to a standard. If I'm not able to reduce the cost of living, to turn the moving vans around, to create jobs and bring investment to Connecticut, then I won't be deserving of a second term. But I am so confident that we will be able to accomplish those things if we have the right policies and leadership in place, that I'm setting that standard for myself right now for when I run for re-election in 4 years. We will turn the moving vans around. We will reduce your electric bills and your taxes. We will create jobs and opportunity for all in this state and secure people's individual rights, protect the rights of our towns to make decisions for themselves, and create a Connecticut where people look to the future with optimism rather than pessimism, as they have for many years.
So I have a follow-up on that, okay, from what you said, because as governor, obviously those speak to me through and through, okay? But if the voters don't get out and vote and we don't change the makeup of your legislature, that will be a very tough hurdle for you. Is that correct?
Yes and no. It is going to be very important to me in running this gubernatorial campaign that we support our legislative candidates and we bring more balance to the state legislature. Listen, all of us get that Connecticut leans a little left, especially on the national level, and there's more registered Democrats than Republicans, although I believe there's more registered unaffiliated and independent voters than Democrats in the state too. Yes. But I don't think the Democratic voters in this state, or certainly the unaffiliated voters in this state, want a state that is 2-to-1 Democrat in the legislature with a rubber stamp in the governor's office. I think they want balance. I think they want checks and balances and limits on the ideological power of the Democratic Party in this state. They didn't vote for all the way in one direction, one-sided everything. I think they voted for some semblance of balance, and we're going to make that case in this governor's race in addition to all the issues. But one thing I would say is, even if I do not win a majority, or Republicans do not win a majority in either house, which is probable that we won't win a majority in both houses, although I think when I'm elected governor, we will pick up a lot of seats and might even be able to win the Senate. The governor's powers in Connecticut constitutionally are more powerful than that of other states. The governor has line item veto power in this state. They're in charge of the bonding commission. So basically, they can negate any of the $27 billion that are spent in this state government every single year. And that is enormous power in and of itself compared to some other governor's offices around the country. But more importantly, it provides you enormous leverage. Because remember, those dollars that are spent are more important to our Democratic friends than they are to our Republican ones.
Yes.
And so, yes, it gives us the ability to negate a lot of spending and protect taxpayers. But more importantly, it gives us enormous leverage over policy writ large in negotiation. So you could view it as Republican governor, Democratic legislature is 50-50 in a way.
But it's a pocketbook.
But it's more than that, really, because of the leverage you hold in power.
Interesting. All right. I did not know that. I did not know that. Good to know.
It makes it that much more appealing for us to win this seat.
It does, because I was under the impression that if you still had a Democratic legislature, it kind of tied your hands. I didn't realize what you could do with that.
No, you could tie their hands.
That makes sense, because it does make it more, so you have to come to the table. It can't just be, well, we want, so you're good. You don't get a say.
And listen, I'll also say this. The relationships I've developed with colleagues on both sides of the aisle in the last 5 years in the Senate have been positive. And I've been able to pass a lot of good center-right legislation that reduces the cost and size of government in kind of narrow cases, because there are Democratic legislators that aren't all the way to the left and are more open-minded. I think there are issues where we can bring the more moderate Democrats into a coalition for change because their constituents want to see a lower cost of living and a more accountable government. They don't want the constant bloat and centralization of power. There are, of course, our colleagues, and some of them are friendly and nice people, but who were really ideologically to the left, unfortunately so. But there are also others that are a little more open-minded and less ideological. And I think on some of these issues, as governor, I can bring them into the fold.
Awesome. Awesome.
What do you think Connecticut does really well and doesn't get enough credit for?
Anything outside of government.
I love it.
I mean, honestly, this is such a wonderful state, right? We have great people. It's a beautiful state. I feel like it's such a great privilege for me to run for governor and crisscross the state, because you get to meet a lot of new people, interesting people, visit beautiful places. You know, the less people, the more beautiful the place is in many cases. So I always loved driving across Eastern Connecticut and North Central Connecticut because of that, Northwestern Connecticut. But I think this state has almost everything working in its favor, except its policies and its economy and its cost of living. I mean, imagine if you just changed that. The moving vans would turn around very quickly. But the people are really what make the state special. And particularly their willingness to be involved in their local government, in their community, to make it a better place. You know, the mantra, we talk about local control a lot and home rule in the state, and we're fearful of the state taking more powers from towns and cities. But that is because our citizens are so engaged and want to be so engaged in their local government, in their town or their city. And it's kind of that muscle that's been built over hundreds of years since we were a colony that has made Connecticut a wonderful place with strong communities, that New England sense of be involved, take accountability for your own community is, I think, what has made Connecticut a special place over hundreds of years. And we have to save it from being watered down.
No, absolutely. And like you said, it's beautiful out when you get to the rural areas, but our people are in the cities. And I think that a lot of times the people in the cities get lost with the media and what's being told to them versus knowing and learning. Many people don't even know how to find information to compare. That's, I think, hopefully this will help some of that. That's one of the things that we push all the time is, there are ways of getting involved. We always give out, emails and different websites you can go to and different people you can talk to. And hopefully they'll see this. And because their life isn't going to get any better if they continue to elect the same way either.
Yeah, and they're the greatest victims of the failures of this state government.
They are.
They've seen the rise in crime and disorder. They've seen the rise in costs eat into their paycheck more than those who are making a higher income or live in a leafy suburb. Yes. I mean, the base of the Democratic coalition is the one bearing the cost of the Democratic agenda more than anyone else. And that's why I think there's an opening in places like our cities with working class voters for Republicans to bring them into the fold. I represent a city in Stamford, and I've seen my vote totals go up with hard work by listening to people and trying to respond to their needs and their priorities, like reducing electricity bills and limiting property taxes in particular.
Perfect. All right. Your turn. Nope. My turn? Okay. What's the biggest myth about Connecticut politics that frustrates you?
There's no hope. There's hope.
There is hope.
There is hope. You never give up, and you certainly never give up on your own home. And
that's something we hear a lot in the gun community.
Yes. Doesn't matter.
Of the no hope aspect. It doesn't matter what I do. It doesn't matter how I vote, but it does.
I always say if you don't get involved or you don't vote and then you give up, you've automatically voted for opposite of what you want, at least in this state.
And listen, there are state representative races, state legislative races that have been won by one vote.
Yes.
Right
in
here
Southington,
in 81st District, right here.
God bless Chris Poulos, but we don't need another Democrat. I'm sorry, in a 2-to-1 legislature, and that's one vote. You didn't vote in that election. Look in the mirror, my friend. I think in Fairfield, there was a state representative race lost by one vote a couple of years ago too.
Haven did the same thing. I think it was 1 vote or 2 votes. It was very
I won an election by 100 votes. Okay.
And that's still close.
That's really close. So, but more importantly, I do not think that the Connecticut resident and the Connecticut voter is going to tolerate unending abuse from its leadership class. And I think that if and when we present a positive alternative that brings people together and that everyone can get behind, we will be able to change this state. And so I've won elections that everyone thought I was going to lose. I've won in a Democratic leaning area. I've won even with more money than any other state legislative race in history thrown against me. So I know that the odds can be defeated, and we shouldn't give up hope, because how much effort and passion we put into this will make a difference in whether or not we can defeat those odds.
Absolutely. Hope makes a big difference with a lot of things. It's attitude. If you think you can do it and you work hard to do it, you can do amazing things. So I'm 100%. That's awesome.
What's the biggest problem in the state that people are not talking about?
That's a really good question.
It's a difficult one. It's different.
Yeah, pick one.
If I'm talking about it, that means people are talking about it. So what am I not talking about? I think, actually, I'll say this. I think maybe Republicans aren't talking enough about healthcare and healthcare policy and healthcare costs. There is so much regulation and red tape and bureaucracy imposed by this state government on the healthcare sector. Under this governor, we've seen health insurance premiums rise by like 10% per year every single year. It almost seems like these are fake headlines, and they come every single year. Connecticut regulates and overregulates its sector and puts shackles on healthcare providers more than most other states in the country. And I think as Republicans, we have to be able to present an alternative where people can expect greater healthcare access and more affordable healthcare. There's only one party that's been in charge of this state while health insurance premiums have been going up 10% year over year over year. And we as Republicans have to be unafraid and willing to present an alternative in order to protect patients, to improve access and reduce costs. So I would say healthcare is something we need to focus more on. Maybe I need to focus more on it too.
What does leadership mean to you when the state's in crisis? Meaning when you're talking about budget, issues, when you're talking about cost of living, when you talk about, the cost of electricity, when you're talking about any amount of things, taxation, what does that mean to you?
Like with Ned, we only see him really during election season.
Yeah.
Right. He kicked up that Facebook and that, TikTok and everything is really kicking that up. But I feel like as governor, you should be involved in these things or talking to people, not just when it's an election season. That's when he starts talking to people, kind of.
I don't think you're the one that would just not talk until they want. You're not the one that's just going to have that silver tongue when you want something. I get the feeling that you truly are there to fight and to work for Connecticut.
Yeah. Listen, it's a great honor to have the opportunity to make a difference. And, you better take advantage of it and do your damnedest when you do. I would say this, the thing I've probably learned most about leadership over the last 5 years is that the most important ability of a leader is to listen, not to speak. And by hearing the people you aim to serve, and as many of them as possible, you then can learn what needs to be done and what can be done by listening to them and their needs and their priorities. And then what you say becomes that much more powerful because you know your audience, you know the people you're aiming to serve. And so the most important thing I can do over the next 10 months is to show up and to listen. Yogi Berra said half of life is showing up. It might even be more than that. And so leadership to me means showing up and listening more than anything else. And from there, you should be a clear and steady and strong voice for the interests of the general public in this state who have been, I think, poorly served by its leadership that hasn't listened to it for far too long.
Well, they listen to their special interests. Don't get me wrong. They're listening. They're just not listening to everybody.
I think that's very insightful because my experience being in the legislature 5 years, it's good because I'm so physically far away that I'm not really I'm not there culturally or socially, but I'm doing my job up there. And there is like a subculture there. Swamp is a pejorative term, but it might apply because everyone up there listens to the people who are speaking the loudest or who are present. They're not listening to the people who aren't showing up, but who are going to work every day, who are paying their taxes, who are following the law. They listen to the people who are in the Capitol, who have an activist group or a lobbyist or are connected in some fashion. And it's kind of human nature that the people who are there speaking the loudest are the ones you're most likely to listen to, but it doesn't represent the state as a whole.
Correct.
So what makes you the better candidate for Connecticut between you and other candidates?
Because you now have two other people running against or primarying you, right?
Yeah. Well, listen, I think most importantly, I'll present and deliver a vision for change and a more affordable, a more safe, and a future with opportunity for everyone in Connecticut. I think my track record shows that. In the Senate, I've been the most vocal and effective advocate for reducing electric rates, for reducing taxes, and for protecting people's individual rights. I have been able to win elections in very difficult circumstances. I've won a state Senate district that Kamala Harris won by 17%. And I did so even though they spent more money than any state Senate campaign in state history against me. They spent $700,000 to try to unseat me. The next most expensive campaign in state history was $500,000. And yet I won by more than I ever did before. And I did so by focusing on the issues that matter most to the people I aim to serve, which was things like their high utility bills, their high taxes, the lack of economic opportunity, the constant undermining of law enforcement. And I think in addition to that, my background, both as a successful legislator, winning tough elections, but more importantly, probably my experience in the private sector, especially focused on energy, will be integral to me solving the state's energy crisis as governor and reducing cost of living for people. So I think I have the track record that proves I can win tough fights, and I can also advance the principles and the policies that we as common sense Connecticut residents all support.
Well, and I have said also, you have the experience at the Capitol. You come to it. You've been sitting there for 5 years. You've been in the mix. You know how it works up at the LOB, and what these committees are doing and how these bills are being passed, where it gives you just that little bit of more of an insight, I guess, than someone who has never been at that level going in fresh. You know what I mean?
You know how things work. Like getting on town council, I am learning. I'm trying to be a sponge. I'm trying to learn how things work. And I feel like that is a really big hurdle. If you don't getting into a governor spot, if you don't know how things work in the legislative because you haven't been there, I think that's a really big hurdle to overcome.
And it's different than
but you're there.
Yeah.
You directly deal with this.
Yeah.
And if you're there and you're not successful in what you've been doing, it's not very useful. But I think the most successful change agents, whether you agree with them or not in our history, think of the presidential level, have had experience delivering change before. Lyndon Johnson, as much as I think he was a horrible president, he was very successful at pushing progressive change as president. And it was in part predicted by his success as a Senate Majority Leader. FDR and Ronald Reagan were successful governors of very large states beforehand. And they showed a track record of delivering results. And, apex, when you'll have the most influence and power as governor, is going to be in your first 100 days. So learning the ropes in your first 100 days is not going to be acceptable for us. You need someone who's going to hit the ground running, who knows the policies that they need to accomplish right away, isn't going to have to learn them on the job, and isn't going to have to just defer to their experts or their advisors, because you're elected. Right. Your advisors are not elected. Your appointees are not elected. I mean, I believe in our democracy, the people elected are the ones who are the principals.
Yes.
You don't want an auto pen governor, whether it's because they're non compos mentis or anything else. But you need someone who can handle the job, who knows the issues and will know how to deliver results.
Awesome.
So we are a 2A podcast, right? We talk about Second Amendment rights. So this next section is going to cover a lot of that stuff. Your voting record. Right. CCDL, we've talked about them on the podcast. You do have a CCDL endorsed as a candidate, which not everyone gets, even if they're just pro 2A. To get their endorsed rating, that means you voted pro 2A on every gun bill that has been brought across the desk. So voting record, never voted against our 2A constitutional rights. And that's not something everyone can say.
That's huge.
Especially in the legislative body that you work in. On both sides of the aisle, too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So how do you personally interpret the Second Amendment, and how should that apply to Connecticut with some of the strictest gun laws in the country?
It should apply to every state. The history of our courts and the history of our Constitution make clear that the individual rights guaranteed in the Bill of Rights apply to individuals and citizens in states. And so you do not lose your Second Amendment rights as an individual because you live in one state or another. Those are guaranteed to you by the U.S. Constitution, and those rights are applied to the states, at least through the 14th Amendment as well. The Second Amendment clearly, in the plain letter reading of the language, applies to individuals, and people have an individual right by virtue of being American citizens to keep and bear arms for their own protection and any other reasons. It is not a militia right. That is the prefatory statement. The operating statement is that the individual right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And there are historic reasons for that. Any student of the 20th century should be very scared of authoritarian governments and their abilities to take away an individual's rights. And because of that, individuals should retain their ability to protect themselves and arm themselves to that end. And so, both the plain letter reading of the Second Amendment guarantees our individual right to keep and bear arms, and the Supreme Court has now ruled that is in fact the case in Heller and McDonald subsequently. So, Connecticut has clearly, I think, gone beyond the pale of what is acceptable in regulating firearms, to the point that I think law-abiding citizens have had their rights taken away in many cases. it is very difficult to abide by all the laws in Connecticut, even if you are well-meaning and doing everything you can to do so, because there's so many and they're so convoluted. It would, even an attorney would have a difficult time keeping track. And
they do.
And they do.
Well, and I think it's on purpose.
It is on purpose. It's absolutely on purpose. And, it's interesting that Neil Gorsuch, the Supreme Court justice, one of the more recent ones, wrote some interesting essays about how if your society has so many laws, you basically you cannot have equal justice or equal treatment under the law, because that means any law, you could be breaking any law at any time, and based on who is in power, they can choose to arbitrarily apply those laws. But if there are too many laws, the average citizen cannot even keep track of what they are abiding by and what they are breaking. And that's certainly the case with our gun laws in Connecticut, which are, I think, to the point of being very unreasonable, which is why it made it easy on me, to vote against the gun control laws that have come across my desk in the Senate.
On that, and part of the reason we do the podcast is to inform people of these laws. But I get questions every day in the store about certain gun laws. You go on the internet, and especially with AI nowadays, which is not always great.
It's not always right.
It's the new Wikipedia of my generation. It's pulling information from everywhere. It's not necessarily pulling correct information.
Exactly.
And people would be like, oh, like the internet said this. And I'm like, well, that's completely wrong. And here's why. But going to the votes, you've been elected and you've had two major bills pass under that, which would be HB 6667, which happened, got signed into law June 6, 23. So voted on before that. And then this last legislative session, you had HB 7042, which was the Accountability Act for gun stores.
Liability.
More recently, Hong has now started to use this, which is what Michelle and I suspected was going to happen.
We actually said it just before the vote went through. This is going to go through, and Tong's going to go after gun
manufacturer. And he sent a letter to Ruger, which is based out of Southport, right? Yes, Michelle?
Yeah, I don't know. I think their headquarters are outside, but they do have an office in Southport.
Yeah. I don't think do not believe they manufacture in Connecticut anymore.
No.
But sent a letter there telling them to stop producing the RXM, which is a Glock Gen 3 clone. Now, I'm not expecting you to know all of that. I know that we're in the industry, but this bill that was passed last year is already starting to have effect with at least one big gun company that is based out of Connecticut.
Well, they also went after Glock, and we had also talked about when that bill went through, everybody, was like, oh, it's not anti-gun. It's just making sure that there's a liability so that nobody, you'll follow the law. Well, we all follow the law anyway, and if we don't, then you should enforce the law with us, but don't add more laws and don't add a way to cripple us with lawsuits. And I remember sitting on a podcast and I said, so what's going to happen when Glock, and I used Glock I didn't even mean to, okay? It was just, that's the one that comes out. But what happens when Glock gets sued and then decides, well, we're not going to send any Glocks to Connecticut anymore because we don't want to deal with this. That now does it become anti-gun to all these people that said it wasn't anti-gun? Because that's an infringement. Now we can't get certain manufacturers, because already in Connecticut there are 4 or 5 different manufacturers that will not send their product to
plenty of wholesalers.
State. And it's not even wholesalers; manufacturers won't. Like not Palmetto State.
Palmetto State won't.
Yeah, this Palmetto State will not send any of their products here. It's not allowed. So you look at those kinds of things. And again, you voted against them. Thank goodness. Thank you.
I'm not expecting you nor any of the senators or reps to know everything. Right. You should
expect them to know something.
Something is always great.
Well, during the Judiciary Committee, when we did testimony, I own a holster company. Okay. We do accessories. So in that original bill, accessories were part of it.
Like a flashlight.
So my husband and I went up and said, hey, this makes no sense. Like if somebody wears my holster and does something and harms someone, now I'm liable because they bought a holster for me. It wasn't even a gun.
Yeah.
And for the rest, it was funny. For the rest of testimony,
they kept using holster.
And everybody kept using holster. And they actually asked the lawyer, what's his name?
Koskoff.
Asked him, is a holster a firearm accessory? They had to ask. And he goes,
Blumenthal Jr.
well, yes. And it was like, you don't realize what your words do.
Yeah.
They don't know what they're actually asking for, but it's okay because they don't like guns.
That's long and the short of it. And listen, there's been a lot of gun control policies passed in the state in the last couple of decades, but there's an argument, the most recent one, applying open-ended civil liabilities on anyone involved in the industry might be the worst because it's so open-ended.
Yeah, it'll cripple me. It'll put me out.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can just ask, when something's happening in the legislature and the state government, you can ask yourself, why is it happening? One of the questions you should ask yourself is, will trial lawyers benefit from this?
And so we're sitting in Judiciary Committee, right? We're testified against this bill. First time I testified on anything.
You did
and
great.
I've written testimony before, but like this directly affected me.
Yeah.
It affected my business, affected my family, and went down there and had, my little pre-typed thing. So, and I'm sitting there later and Koskoff comes on, right? The guy who obliterated Remington, and him and Fishbein go back and forth for 40 minutes, 30 minutes.
A long time. Yeah.
Which is a very interesting debate just to watch on the outside. And if Koskoff is for something and you're a gun owner, you should be on the other side of that. Because, and it is, right? It's exactly what ended up happening with Ruger so far. We'll find out what happens, right? Nothing has really changed.
Well, Ruger basically told them not happening.
Yeah. They just came out with their full-size model.
Yeah. So. But they also said, when you look at these things, and we were talking about, keeping like cost of living here and keeping people here, by passing that law specifically, well, Chase, I stopped doing certain services because of it, which means now I've lost a revenue stream.
Yep.
Okay. Without that revenue stream, now I start looking at what other states do I want to go to that won't do that. So now you've lost me as a taxpayer and my business. But that's the stuff that needs to be thought about, is how do you keep people here versus chasing them away? And like you had said, that's what needs to be addressed.
We used to be the gun manufacturer, possibly of the United States here.
We were.
Okay. We had so many firearm companies here. And like I drove by a Colt the other day. We were coming back. 84 was messed up. Took the back roads home. And that looks depressing now.
Yeah.
Like this company that has been around 1800s, I believe.
Well, they had to sell the CZ, and now CZ has taken a lot of their stuff out of state.
And I mean, Mossberg is still made here. Ruger's gone. There's so many companies that were here and now are gone. And you have very few that are hanging on. And that's a across the nation kind of thing, right? Smith & Wesson left Massachusetts. They went to Tennessee.
Yeah, but you look at the states they're leaving versus the states they're going to. And those states are making out hand over fist.
We're losing. If you don't care about the issue, it's the Second Amendment,
right?
At least you should care about having good jobs and good taxpayers here for the benefit of our state economy. And they're so ideological, that the Democratic leadership of this state, that they're willing to destroy opportunity, destroy economic activity for the sake of their ideological agenda to punish law-abiding citizens exercising their Second Amendment rights. And so it's terrible all the way down.
The really cool thing about the gun industry in Connecticut, not in the manufacturing aspect, but on the retail aspect, is they're mom and pop shops, right? That's what we call them. You have Cabela's / Bash Pro, and that's it for like commercial entities, right? All of, all the stores that every other store, every other gun store, every other federal firearms license that sells guns is a small store, right? Maybe not in square footage. There are definitely some bigger physical stores out there, but they are owned by somebody, not a corporation. And that's an important factor. I have 5 employees, and that I pay, that I have built a business and can now afford to pay on top of paying myself. And you extrapolate that out to all the other stores, right? And especially
the families that they're supporting, which are helping keep them there and their families grow up here and continue. It's a huge line if you follow it through versus just it basically right now the policies that they do are cutting off their nose to spite their face. They're just don't make
And
sense.
it is so difficult to operate a small business in the
Yeah.
first place.
Oh,
And you're
Yes,
actually
yes,
providing
yes.
services to people. You're following the law. You're providing jobs and livelihoods to people. And at every turn, the state government and its leadership just thumbs its nose at you. And if you're in the firearms business and a small business, it's that much worse.
well, the
And providing
fees, the permits, the permit now,
Insurance.
like it used to be LLCs used to cost $20. Now they're $80 or better. Then you have, for firearms, then we have to get another certificate from the chief of police for $200 now. It used to be nothing, and I don't understand. If you have a federal firearms license, why do you need another permit from the town to say you can sell firearms? Like you already have that.
Yeah. And
that was part of HB 6667, by the way, was the increased fee there.
Yes.
That was one of the little things that was thrown in that wonderful bill.
And listen, if you're more skeptical of firearms, then you should want kind of good citizens who are providing training and safety and responsible, guidance to others. They should want people like you in the state, rather than pushing everything to the underground where it really is actually putting people's safety in jeopardy.
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we'll move on to the next one. And you already said that, you think Connecticut's gone too far in their gun laws on certain ones. But are there any gun laws that you think are good that you would keep in place?
Yeah, good question. I think that all the evidence suggests that background checks are a very effective way of protecting the public safety and keeping guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them, who are criminals. Mm-hmm. And one of the pieces of legislation I introduce, for instance, every year is to do an audit of the effectiveness of our background check system, because there are cases, and very tragic cases, where there are false, and obviously there could be cases where they're false positives, and you're denying people their rights as well. But I think an effective background check system is one of the best policies for keeping people safe, protecting law-abiding citizens, and preventing criminals from putting other people in danger. So that's, I think, one of the better examples of a good policy.
Do you think with Connecticut, because we run two, we have a Connecticut background and then we have NICS. A lot of states are just running a NICS system, period. Do you think it's a little redundant in Connecticut, or do you think it is helpful? Do you know? You may not know.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to pass this audit, and I haven't been able to get the law passed, because I'd like to find out if there is a difference in the systems, if one has more false positives or false negatives, or how many there are at all. I've seen some evidence that say that, the NICS system doesn't have many mistakes in it, but we do know it has had some mistakes, and some tragic mistakes. So one of the reasons I want to pass the law is to try to understand that better.
All right. I understand that. That's good.
I don't think you're going to find anyone that disagrees with background checks for that exact aspect, right? There are people that definitely should not have firearms, right? They have felons, right? Violent felons specifically, definitely probably shouldn't have a firearm. So I agree I think most people agree with you on the background check issue. I don't think anyone that is
not like the registration aspect, because that's technically illegal, but we don't call it a registration.
Yeah.
So that bothers me just as
database
person.
I'd like to see, Senator Sampson puts in a proposal every year to create more uniformity and predictability in the permitting system in Connecticut, which is it seems so arbitrary and can arbitrarily be used to deprive law-abiding people of their rights. And more frequently than not seems to be doing so to law-abiding people in cities who might actually need the protection more than others who don't live in as dangerous neighborhoods. So that's an area where if you have, we talked about the most recent law, which it's very broad authority to government. It should be very defined what your authority is, because if there's too broad authority, too much discretion to people in government, they can capriciously deny people of their rights over and over again.
Well, it happens. I have a few customers that are named Jose Rodriguez. There are actually 5 in my system that have been here within the last year, which is obviously a pretty common Hispanic name. And it hits every time.
It's not them, but
it's not them. And this guy they get what's called a 48-hour delay, where then a detective at the state has to go and run the background check with the information to make sure it's not this person and it's this person. And it's super frustrating. And he's a regular. He knows this happens. And honestly can't buy a gun on a weekend, because he either has to wait until they're there, which is normally a Monday through Friday kind of thing. And it's kind of messed up, right? He never did anything wrong to my knowledge, and they infringe on his right a lot.
The problem is I don't know. I know a lot about what SLFU does up there, and I know a lot about how the systems work. And on that aspect,
is it a state thing or a Fed thing, or both?
It's both, because they hit on Fed levels too. So the reason the detective then has to look in it just for a brief is because they can dig into, like, you have civilians doing the background checks. Okay. When this kind of a thing hits, the detective can dig deeper into things that they don't want the civilians having access to, which I get. But the detectives are there on limited basis. So, and, depending on the day, they could have a gazillion of them come through that they have to check, or it could be 2. You never know. It just depends on who's buying at that time. So as far as the background checks and the quote unquote TDs that they get, the temporary denials, I don't know that there's a way to really fix that aspect, because the systems are the systems and the names are the names.
Better systems.
I think personally, I'd like to see more funding for that department. They put a lot of work on that department, and they never have a fiscal line item for any of the laws that they pass. Here, do more
on that
money.
HB 6667 banned CT others, and then we had to go and register them as quote unquote assault weapons. And so that was done by May of 2024. They'd be submitted by. We are now sitting in February of 2026. Joshua has received 0 of them. And about 90% of the people that have submitted it have received 0.
They said it's going to take another 2 to 3 years because it's only done on overtime.
Because there was no funding for it. So they push a law through and don't even give the department the proper amount of money.
It's a tale as old as time in state capital. People are very interested in passing policies and not necessarily enforcing or following through on them.
Well, and it's one of those things where you have a deadline, but we don't.
Yep.
And that, and I get it. The basic standing on it is, as long as you supplied your assault weapon cert, consider it good unless you hear otherwise. Or if you don't hear anything and they say, we're done with them all, then you need to look at it. So they're not saying you're not good, they're saying thank you for putting it in. It's going to take us a long time to get to you. I don't necessarily think that's right. I understand it, again, because I know the department. And I know people up there that are working on them and trying to get them done. But overtime up there is wonky, like it is with any other state agency. Sometimes overtime's unlimited, and then all of a sudden, no overtime. You can't have any overtime. So if there's no overtime, they can't do this work, which is tough, because the average Joe citizen who has followed the law, done everything we wanted to do, can't get our paperwork back saying, okay, you're legal.
2 or 3 people a week come in and ask me that question.
Absolutely.
All right. So supporters of strict gun laws say they are about public safety and protecting public. How do you respond to voters who see gun restrictions as necessary for public safety?
Well, I think all the practical evidence across the country, including in Connecticut, have showed that it does not make a significant difference to have so many gun laws that nobody can keep track of them or even enforce them. In fact, they probably make the state less safe because they're a penalty against law-abiding people and in some ways benefit criminals. But if you look state by state, how strict the gun policies are, and just add a couple of other factors or variables into the equation, like how much poverty they have, there's basically no significant influence of how strict the gun laws are on homicides writ large. I mean, there are policies that we all agree are a good idea, like background checks. And then there are policies that are beyond the pale and unreasonable. Having reasonable policies that respect people's rights and enforcing them in a fair but rigorous manner is the best way to keep people safe. Ensuring police have the ability to take illegal guns off the street and prosecute criminals and go where the crime is how we keep ourselves safe. Connecticut has among the strictest gun laws in the country, but over the last 10 to 15 years, it's actually seen its homicides go up by more than the country writ large on a percentage basis. And that's not because that was while our gun laws got stricter.
Yeah, it's not a fluke.
and are probably among the strictest in the entire country. The correlation, the relationship just doesn't exist. It doesn't make sense. Listen, we've seen in the past 60 or 70 years a couple of very, very dramatic instances of murders and homicides going way up and way down all across the country. And it completely related to the culture around law and order and law enforcement and respect of law enforcement and the policies related to criminal justice and law enforcement. In 2020, we all remember what happened. There was an enormous anti-policing sentiment that permeated the entire country, but especially the state, and policies that followed through on that sentiment. In the 1960s, there was an enormous antagonism to law enforcement, and a sense that we shouldn't punish criminals, but we should rehabilitate them. And there was an enormous increase in killings and homicides and violence that came very quickly thereafter. There was no real dramatic change in gun laws in that period of time. The same time in the 90s and the 2000s, you saw probably an easing of gun laws around the country, and you saw homicides drop enormously. And not because those gun laws probably were eased around the country, but because the rise and fall of homicides and serious crimes around the country had nothing to do with the gun laws, really, one way or the other. Again, we should have good common sense gun laws that respect people's rights and go after criminals. But the rise and fall of serious crimes and violence in our country has really not had much to do with gun laws at all. It's really had to do with law enforcement and smart policing policies.
Well, and when you make so many laws like we do, on top of laws, on top of laws, on top of laws, because those laws didn't get followed, so we have to make a new law. Instead of enforcing the laws, they don't enforce the laws here. They make more laws. And to me, enforcement makes more sense of a few laws than lots of laws with little enforcement that is confusing.
That's exactly right.
So this kind of jumped into the next question, but on the follow-up of that, what would you change about enforcing the laws? Right? We have all these laws on the books, and when a criminal goes and does something, especially with a firearm, maybe it's in the commission of a robbery, normally not always, but normally the firearm charge is thrown out.
Yeah.
It's the first thing to go.
Yeah.
And it happens a lot. Central Connecticut Arms had a break-in on New Year's Day a couple of years ago. And it ended up going to a whole federal level because of the amount of guns that were stolen. And I think it was like 31 guns or something at the time. This is old news. And it ended up getting in this federal court, right? Not Connecticut, but they ended up with like 2 charges instead of the 31 that he should have had.
Yeah.
Well, Connecticut did it with someone I know of, not an acquaintance. It wasn't a friend. And he had guns that he had taken from his girlfriend and his own, but he had scratched off all the serial numbers. He had, when you looked at it, I think he had like something like 20 felony D charges or C charges for this. When he actually went to court, and what he was convicted of was 2. Now I get it. Okay.
Plea down, get it done.
Correct. And I get it on that, but still,
repeat offenders.
He got out of jail. Like, if you're going to do that kind of stuff and you're going to say, we're going to do the strictest ones. And it was right after the Sandy Hook. So it was when they were coming in hard, and we're going to enforce these, and we're going to, you people all the time, you people who own guns. Yet you actually have someone who has done something egregious and
federally illegal.
You said every gun charge is going to be this many years.
Yep.
And then you plea him down, and he got out of jail.
So how do you enforce it?
There is such an obvious and natural contradiction from our progressive friends who want to impose so many gun laws, but actually don't believe in enforcement of our criminal code. And so I think there was a study that came out of the state government that found a large portion of all gun related arrests and charges were either dropped or pled down, a large majority of them. And we have, on top of that, passed really, really progressive policing policies in the last 6 years in Connecticut, especially and including the 2020 police law, that have taken away the ability of our police to take the illegal guns off the street. They've ended consent searches, for instance, which is one of the ways that police took guns out of the hands of criminals who possess them illegally, and made it more difficult on police to do their job in any other number of ways. And that's when we saw murders go up in the state, right? It wasn't because we took away a bunch of gun laws. I mean, it's happening on these people's watch, the Democrats who support all these policies. And, so we can repeal some of those policies on the 2020 law. We can ensure that our state's attorneys are prosecuting more of the actual crimes. When people are put away for very serious crimes for a long time, they shouldn't be constantly paroled, as this governor was doing, to people who are convicted of murder without even alerting the victims' families. So listen, to get back to the original question, I was elected in a Democrat-leaning district repeatedly, in a district that is probably relatively pro-gun control. And I voted, against what I thought were unacceptable gun control policies because it was the right thing to do. And I was told by many people when I was doing that I was potentially, putting my Senate seat in jeopardy, but it was the right thing to do. And I swore an oath to uphold the Constitution. And I take that more seriously than the convenience of being reelected. But I think that my constituents also understood when I explained that we need good policing policies that take guns out of the hands of criminals, and that these policies will not keep us safe. They thought me a credible kind of messenger of that truth, that I was still able to build their support.
That makes sense. All right. So the next one is, speaking of trust, and you were able to get that across. And this is the last gun question per se. Why should Connecticut gun owners trust you? Because we get told a lot of times it's okay. Yep. And then it's not.
Because I've always kept my word. And even when it was politically inconvenient for me to vote in defense of citizens' Second Amendment rights, I did so, and I did so repeatedly. Even when I knew it meant potentially putting re-election in jeopardy for myself in the district that I represent, I did it because my conscience says it was the right thing to do. And so I have a track record of standing up and doing the right thing even when it was politically inconvenient. And that's exactly the way I would behave and carry myself as governor.
I love that.
All right. If you could, moving on to policies. So if you could fully fix one issue, budget, housing, education, public safety, or something different, what would it be and why? Like if you'd snap your fingers and...
Fun.
Listen, the size and cost of government in Connecticut is just too damn big. And there needs to be a policy in place that says we're going to limit the growth of government every year, and that for every new law or regulation that we put into place, we eliminate one or two at the same time. There needs to be limitations. If you're asking me one big, beautiful policy that would make Connecticut a better place, it would have to be a limitation on the growth of government and all the regulations and inhibitions that imposes on our economy and our citizens.
What's a tough but necessary decision you think the next governor will have to make?
That's a good question. There's going to be a lot of difficult decisions, but I think most of the difficulties will be kind of bringing people together in order to create the change that we in fact need. I think some of the most difficult laws and policies that will need to be passed will be the state budget and how we can cut taxes for people and limit the size of government and the growth of spending. That's probably where, when you get down to brass tacks, you're going to need someone with a backbone, someone who will negotiate effectively and stand up for our rights and for the rights of taxpayers in a debate with and a negotiation with a most likely Democratic legislature. So those are probably going to be when the mettle of our governor is tested the most.
Well, and it's hard.
Well, the next question is, how do you plan to govern effectively in a predominantly Democratic state with a Democratic legislator? So kind of
that leads right in.
And I think I touched upon it a little bit earlier, but the powers of the governorship in Connecticut are constitutionally stronger than in most states because you have a line item veto and because you're in charge of the bonding commission. That essentially means that you can veto or stop any of the $27 billion that are passed in the state government every year. Maybe there's some limits when there are contracts in play, but that gives you enormous ability to protect taxpayers, but more importantly, it gives you enormous leverage over a Democratic legislature who cares about that spending. And so that, I think, makes the governor, or gives the governor, a better negotiating position than the legislature when the parties are split. And it's important then that we nominate and elect a Republican governor who is going to have the backbone and the ability to use their leverage when they represent us in those negotiations.
When we had Rob Sampson on at one point in time, just because you talked about budget specifically, he had said the way that currently the administration is doing budgets is, it's basically state employees, not necessarily all of them. Okay. And it moves its way down. So then at the bottom, you have municipalities, and then you have the people are at the very bottom of your budget. Do you agree with that kind of a thought process? Or, because I know there is always compromise. You have to make compromise. When you're doing a budget, nobody is happy all the time and gets everything they want. We're not all rainbows and sunshines here.
Yeah.
It's money. So would you be working harder to make sure that, like, obviously, because you've said several times, you want the people's cost of living to go down. You want, income, you want to keep business. So my guess is you would be moving the people in municipalities up a little bit versus the special interests.
I wouldn't give anyone the benefit of the doubt. I think that we should have kind of a zero-based budgeting approach in the state of Connecticut, where all sources and needs should justify themselves every 2 years rather than just get money because they got money last budget.
Right.
And I think that is how businesses and families have to operate, that all of your spending has to be justified, because our resources are scarce, and the state of Connecticut has milked taxpayers worse than almost any other state in the country over a long period of time. And so I view myself, when I go to Hartford, everyone seems to have an interest group or an activist group in mind that they're prioritizing the protection of. When I go to Hartford, I am primarily concerned with protecting kind of the forgotten man and woman of the state who doesn't have a lobbyist, who doesn't have a voice in the state government, who doesn't come up and constantly rabble rouse, but is paying the taxes, is following the laws, and is bearing the brunt of the bad decisions made by our state leadership. They deserve someone who is going to ensure that every dollar is spent wisely and responsibly, and no more than is absolutely necessary is taxed from them to send to Hartford in the first place.
I love that you said zero budget, zero, you start at zero, because most people don't understand what that means. Because again, I got this last year, so I should have the same thing. I love that you're one that's a proponent of revisiting those costs, especially when with the policies in place now, we're losing federal funding, or the potential to lose more and more federal funding the more we double down against the federal government. So I absolutely love that concept. I just want to put it out there to you.
It's the right mindset. You're not entitled to someone else's money. You have to justify it.
Agreed.
How do you appeal to independent and unaffiliated and moderate voters who are skeptical of both parties?
They should be skeptical of both parties, because I think both parties have failed them over a long period of time, nationally and in the state. And so their skepticism is well warranted and well deserved. Listen, I've had success in bringing moderate Democrats and unaffiliated moderate voters into my coalition in order to win in my district, because Republicans are outnumbered by thousands. We're the smallest of all three designations. It's an electorate that leans to the left, and they're good people, and many of whom I disagree with on certain policies. But it's about building trust, and building trust around a governing agenda that most people can get behind. I think most people in this state agree that the taxes are too damn high, that the electric rates are too damn high, and that their state government has failed them time after time. And I think by focusing on the issues that matter most to people, and by showing a sincere effort to present a governing alternative, a substantive campaign that's focused on issues rather than slogans or personalities, I'm just being myself, but this campaign is going to be about the issues and governing and leadership. And it's not just going to be about personality or the cut of my jib. And I think people will respond to that. And I think that is a campaign that wins unaffiliated, moderate, and moderate Democrat voters.
which is what we need to do in this state because they outnumber both parties.
That's right.
Fantastic. So about taxes, economy, jobs, and cost of living, which we've kind of touched on here or there. Why do people feel like they're working harder but falling further behind in this state?
Because they are. Because, the cost of living has gone up faster than wages in Connecticut for many years. We've seen no real income growth for the middle class after inflation. That's not conjecture. We all know it. We see it in our own lives and in our neighbors' lives, but the facts back it up that while other states are seeing incomes and wages rising for the average family, even after inflation, that there's been stagnation in Connecticut. Poverty has gone up over the last 30 years in Connecticut. And that's just a shocking fact in a state that was historically very wealthy and in a country where the poverty rate's gone down over 30 years because it tends to go down over time. Poverty was, 8-9% when I was born in the state. And now it's 12-13%. Again, totally unacceptable, a total indictment of the leadership class in this state because they have raised people's taxes year after year. They have raised people's electric rates, and they have made it more and more difficult on our small businesses to create jobs and deliver services. And they've chased people out of the state and jobs and opportunities with them. People feel that way because it's true. And it's true because of the failures of the people who have been in leadership for many years.
So how do we fix it?
That's
the next question.
That's a great question. And that's exactly what my entire gubernatorial campaign will be premised on. It'll be premised on change and solutions and substance. Tomorrow, this week.
This will be out a couple weeks from now.
Yeah, so. this will be out a couple weeks.
So 2 weeks ago, I released my first major platform agenda in this gubernatorial race, which is a 6-point plan to reduce electric rates by 20% and eliminate the public benefits charge. I'll be rolling out a tax plan to deliver the largest middle-class income tax cut in state history, a healthcare plan to improve access and reduce costs, especially for small businesses who are struggling with those costs the most, and to generate economic opportunity and create jobs and bring investment back to the state. I am running for governor to do the job, not to have the title, and my campaign will reflect that because it will be based on the issues and on a substantive vision for change in our state government.
I'm going to ask an opinion really quick. I'm just curious listening to that because everything you say is lovely. Do you think raising the minimum wage is helping at all?
No, all the evidence says that there is going to be a few workers who it helps, but it's going to destroy jobs for many others who are even below them on the economic ladder, so to speak. And it raises costs for small businesses and all businesses that the goods and services they're selling to the general public increase so that the higher wage is basically nullified by the higher cost of living. So all the evidence says it destroys jobs for the people who need it the most, and it raises the cost of living that offsets some of the increase in wages that some benefit from. So on the whole, there's not a lot of evidence to suggest that it's really helping anybody. The way that you improve wages for working class and middle class people is to create more productivity, more demand for labor, make it easier to create jobs, easier to deliver goods and services. And that's what creates a bigger middle class and reduces poverty in the end.
So as a small business owner, and I very much like to think I pay my employees well, especially for the industry, knowing what some other stores pay, which is either at or very close to minimum. I don't pay that here, but the cost of doing business is super expensive, right? The electric cost alone is always amazes me. Something with Eversource, whether you might know this, you might not. There's a commercial rate for businesses, and then there's a residential rate. It's the same electricity in the same lines. It's not like I get priority access to the electricity, which is amazing. The amount of money I pay for electric here. Gas, the same thing, because it's through Eversource. It's a commercial rate that comes in. It's the same gas that goes upstairs to the people. We have apartments upstairs here. And the minimum wage aspect, things go up. So we haven't done a podcast on this, but gun prices, the cost of that, they went up January 1st for a handful of big brands, went up anywhere from 3 to 5% in the cost to the dealer and goes up about 10% in the MSRP aspect. So then that affects the consumer aspect. And even here, I went up in my pistol permit classes by it was $5 increase, and I haven't had to do that since COVID. But pay and again, I pay my instructor pretty well, much more above minimum wage
Yeah,
because of
but
the
you
job
want
he
that.
does, and I
Yeah.
want to do that. I want to keep them here. Cost of living, cost of doing business in Connecticut continues to rise, and then at the end, it hurts the end consumer.
That's right.
And they don't understand that. They always think that the business owner, well, you're just charging too much. Well, why are your prices at this price? You used to be at this price. And they don't understand the same as they're having to pay more for their electric and their food and their rent or their whatever. Okay. We have to too, but we're also doing it here and home.
That's right.
We're doing it twice.
Exactly right.
So, what would you say to young professionals and families who feel priced out of staying here?
I need their vote. I need their support. I mean, I am so confident that we can turn the ship around. This state's economy has all the attributes necessary to succeed. We have the third most educated workforce in the country. We have a great location. We have wonderful communities. And the fact that we're experiencing almost no economic growth, the fact that people are leaving the state boggles the mind, except when you consider that our state policies and our state leadership have made it prohibitively costly to live here, to work here, to create jobs here. We can fix this, though. Even with mediocre state policies and state leadership, this state's economy can flourish. But that's why I'm running for governor, because I am a believer in this state. I'm an optimist that with change, the state can flourish like never before. Deliver the largest middle-class income tax cut in state history, cut electric rates by 20%, reduce healthcare costs. All these things can be done with the right leadership, and Connecticut's economy will boom.
So those are feasible, because we always hear we can't do any of these cuts because we need the money.
Every single promise I make is something I am confident I can deliver. And it's not a stretch. I could say I will eliminate all your taxes. I will reduce your electric rates by 110%. I'll cut your healthcare costs in half. All the numbers that I use, I know my friends, my advisor, you're too wonky, you're too in the weeds, whatever. I'm being myself. And I'm going to win or lose this race being myself. I promise a $1,500 income tax cut for the average family in Connecticut. The average family in Connecticut makes like $100,000, a little over $100,000, because I know how I could pay for that. But that would be the largest middle-class tax cut in state history, and it could be built upon in a second term. I know I can deliver 20% reduction in electric rates because the public benefits charge is about that. It's an unnecessary discretionary set of fees to fund dozens of government programs which aren't needed, and the few that might be positive could be funded through the normal budget process. Plus, if we improve natural gas access, we could actually cut electric rates by a little bit more than that. I'm confident I could cut healthcare costs by 5 to 10% by reforming some of the red tape that hurts our providers and makes it more costly, by delivering more choice in health insurance to consumers, association health plans, and certificate of need law reform. Those could cut healthcare costs by 5 to 10%. All of this accrues to like $3,000 of economic relief in my first term for the average middle-class family in our state. That's a substantial improvement in quality of life and reduction in cost of living, and it will help our economy grow so that my second term, the benefits are even greater.
Fantastic. All right. So how do you balance, and part of this goes along with what you said, a lot of it does. How do you balance tax relief with funding core services like education and infrastructure? So if you're going to cut all these things, how do you balance it to make sure we still have roads?
That's a great question. That's a great question. And I think all the candidates should be asked questions like these, and any politician, because politicians are prone to promise a lot of things, but not explain how they're going to deliver them. And that's why time after time we're asking ourselves, why does things stink? Well, because we got to hold these people accountable, and they should have to explain themselves. So what we touched upon before, that there should be zero-based budgeting, that every source of government spending should have to justify itself as a need. And there are needs like roads and bridges and schools and public safety. And We need to prioritize those in our state budgeting process. Those need to be delivered. And guess what? They need to be delivered in a more cost-effective way. Connecticut, I saw a study that said Connecticut pays the second most per mile of highway of any state in the country. So if there are rules and regulations, and there are, around public spending of infrastructure dollars that can be improved to make it more cost effective, that's a good idea, even while prioritizing that spending overall. At the same time, there are items like we over budget for state agencies, so they're given more room to spend unnecessarily and they're not held accountable. We spent over $100 million in the last budget that I voted against to give taxpayer benefits to people in this country illegally. That's not acceptable. And I think even a lot of Democratic voters wouldn't see that as such, because regular American citizens here in Connecticut are struggling to get by. So take a zero-based budgeting approach, prioritize the most important needs like schools, roads, bridges, healthcare for the people who most need it. And even then make those government services deliver results in a cost-efficient way, and stop with the fluff, the unnecessary, and the ideological stuff. And I think what you'll be left over with is a government that works well for the people and the public interest, while also ensuring that people have an acceptable and manageable tax burden on top of it.
Okay.
What would you change about how Connecticut attracts and keeps businesses?
Well, I think it's most of what we're talking
Yeah,
about.
we've kind of
And keep workers here. But
yeah, listen, the cost of living is clearly the greatest obstacle to people staying here and working here and affording to live here. And I think an economic agenda like what I will be proposing and running on that provides roughly $3,000 of relief in my first term to the average middle class family would go a long way in that direction. We also need to stop choking our businesses, our employers, but especially our small businesses with all the unnecessary red tape that have been imposed on them that, according to some rankings, makes Connecticut one of the hardest states in the country to start a business. So as governor, I would require that 2 regulations be eliminated on small businesses for every one new one that is advanced through our legislature. That would go a long way in holding the state bureaucracy accountable and reducing the burdens on small businesses.
Connecticut has a history of budget challenges. Okay. What lessons have you learned, or should you have learned, from going through the budget process a couple of times now?
The mistakes have been repeated over and over again. And the people in charge of this state have just failed to learn the lessons of history. They continue today to overpromise and make the same exact mistakes of the past that have resulted in Connecticut having one of the 5 highest tax burdens of any state in the country. In 2017, you might remember, the state Senate was actually split between Democrats and Republicans. So talk about having hope, right? That's recent history that we actually had a 50-50 state Senate.
We were there.
There you go. And when we did, we passed a state budget full of reforms that actually sought to remedy all the mistakes of overpromising and overborrowing that states passed. So a spending cap that limited growth in spending to inflation plus income growth, that's reasonable. Maybe it's even too high, but it's reasonable. Other when you have one-time tax revenue, don't spend it all in one place if you can't count on it in the future. Well, we're 7 years after the fact, and things have become a little easier on the state budget because of federal monies and inflation. And so 7 years after, we corrected some of those mistakes. This governor and state legislature have undermined and changed several of those policies that sought to protect taxpayers 7 years ago on a bipartisan basis. So the volatility cap that limits how much you can spend of the one-time tax dollars that can't be counted on, we've significantly undermined that policy. The spending cap, well, now they're just spending money off budget, quote unquote. So the spending cap has essentially been neutered by the fact that they're just creating other funds, other slush funds, other budgets that are from underneath that spending cap. So this governor has touted the fiscal guardrails, as they're colloquially called, over and over again, even while he is eviscerating them as governor, breaking his promises. He was just touting them the other day. I don't even know if he knows what he's been doing while he's been governor. So it's enormously frustrating. Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And we will be doomed to repeat it in this state if we don't make a change.
Absolutely.
Is there any program that you know of that should 100% be reduced or eliminated from this budget? Like if you had to pick something, what would it be?
Even if they're politically popular.
Yeah. The immediate one that pops to mind is the fact that we spend over $100 million of taxpayer dollars for benefits for people in the country illegally. When regular Americans, even in our state, are struggling to get health care, struggling to make ends meet, using their tax dollars to give to people who are in our state and in our country illegally, is totally unjustifiable and unfair. So that is the most glaring and obvious that comes to mind.
Now, but there's still people in this state, because I see the arguments all the time that say if they're here illegally, they're getting no help. They're getting no subsidies. They're getting nothing. So how do you convince them that they are?
It's as plain as the nose on my face in the state budget, you know, that there was $110, $120 million of taxpayer dollars for healthcare for people in the country illegally below a certain age. And we obviously know that there's other kind of indirect benefits being used by people in the country illegally and in the state illegally. And listen, I mean, again, the Democrats in the state government don't make a secret of it when they're in the Capitol. On the campaign trail, they don't advertise it. It is wild. I read some of the campaign literature. You know, you'd think these people are Republicans. They're like, we're going to cut your electric rates. We're going to make the state affordable. It's like, you guys are in charge, you know, and the state's not affordable.
And they tell us every election year, and people go, oh, okay. And it's like, when do you learn it's not true?
It is wild. You read their campaign literature and they are running as like moderate Republicans. So the record does not match up.
Speaking of the illegal, population that we have and how we've been funding them, how do you feel about the Trust Act and with having our law enforcement not be able to help federal law enforcement?
So the Trust Act, and specifically I'll refer to the 2019 Trust Act, took away the ability of our state and local police to communicate with or transfer to federal authorities any individual who is both in the state illegally, but who has also been convicted of a misdemeanor or a Class C, D, or E felony while in the state. So take, for instance, real cases of individuals who have been convicted of manslaughter after they serve their prison sentence and they're in this country illegally. Even though the federal authorities have a detainer for that person, the state police or the local police has to let them out onto the streets, potentially jeopardizing the public safety because of this law that was signed by this governor and passed by the Democratic legislature. Tim Walz was just being interviewed the other day and was talking about his conversation with Tom Homan. And, you know, Governor Tim Walz is a very progressive guy. And he was talking about how, well, in Minnesota, after someone who's in this country illegally serves their prison sentence, we turn them over to federal immigration authorities if they have a detainer on them. That is illegal in Connecticut. So Connecticut is far to the left of Tim Walz. They make Tim Walz look like a moderate in this state. Actually, Tim Walz has the position of the Republicans in the state government in Connecticut. That's how far to the left and unreasonable our state government has got. And my argument is simply this: we should have a common sense approach that most people can get behind. And I think, you know, you're not going to knock on every door, but people who have committed a crime in addition to coming to this country illegally in Connecticut should be transferred to federal authorities in the interest of public safety.
Okay.
I'm going to try to speed some of these up because, you know, we've been here a hot minute. What's working in the Connecticut education system, and what isn't, and what should success look like for students graduating high school today?
There are many school districts that do a good job. There is an enormous investment from parents and local governments in our public schools. Connecticut spends the second most or third most per pupil on its public schools of any state. And so generally in many towns, there is a good caliber of public education. I think I went to a great public school myself. I think the standards have fallen in the last 10 or 20 years in our state, and we've actually seen test scores fall over the last 15 years in Connecticut, whereas they've only fallen over the last 5 years nationwide. And so I think we need higher standards in the state because every kid, regardless of their background, should have a great public education.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How concerned should Connecticut residents be about crime right now? And then what role would you play in supporting local police departments while addressing accountability?
I'll just say the latter. I've always appreciated the strong support of the rank and file police on my campaigns because it's important, and I've always believed it's important to back those who are willing to put their own safety at risk to protect us. Connecticut needs to repeal or significantly alter its 2020 police law that undermined our law enforcement and made the state less safe, as well as the 2019 Trust Act, which simply lets violent criminals back out on the street who shouldn't even be in our country in the first place. Those are common sense changes that would make us much more safe.
Perfect. How do you govern a state where people feel deeply divided? And this is a two-part. And what do you say to voters who say politics doesn't help people like me?
Well, to the second point, politics isn't helping regular people in Connecticut these days because the people who have been elected to lead us are so often not actually responding to people's needs, and their policies are making things worse. So I understand where they're coming from. They're right. But I do believe we can bring people together. That's the rhetoric I always use on my campaigns. When I have differences with opponents, I focus on their record and on the substance, not on personal attacks. And when I am campaigning in my own defense, I focus on issues and what I would do in office. And I try to be realistic and substantive in what I promise. But I focus on the issues that matter most to regular people. And I think in that way, I can build a big coalition across different groups, different areas, because I think the major issues are something that almost everybody is concerned about.
Okay.
With energy and environment, we'll switch these together too. Connecticut residents face higher energy costs. We've kind of addressed that. What's your plan to bring those down? I think we've gone over that with the public benefit charges. And then how do you also balance the environmental protection with economic growth? Because that's always a general concern, I think, of the left is environmental. And obviously we all care about the environment.
Yep.
So
I think there needs to be a balance as you described. I think that we can provide more affordable and reliable energy to the state and to our power grid specifically by relying more on natural gas, nuclear, and hydropower in comparison to alternatives, which could be potentially oil or coal. So when we can't generate enough power on a really cold night, we actually have to turn on these emergency oil plants, for instance, and those burn much dirtier than natural gas. But it's only because people like Governor Lamont and Kathy Hochul and Maura Healey in Massachusetts have been unable to or blocked natural gas pipeline expansion from the West, which would allow us to rely more on that, which burns cleaner for our air, and less on oil plants, which are much less clean for air. And we need to always keep the lights on, but I think we can do so in an affordable way that is also somewhat environmentally conscious.
So you mentioned nuclear, which used to be, I think, a hot button topic.
Yeah.
I don't know if it really is that much anymore with the advance of technology and everything, but we had or have 3 plants in Connecticut. I think only one currently is operational. What do you think about nuclear? I always found nuclear pretty interesting.
I think nuclear is an excellent alternative. It is reliable, so it almost always runs, whereas most sources of energy, if you're solar, it's only if the winds, other sources have to turn off more often. Nuclear runs more than almost any other plant type of energy source. So it's most reliable. It burns clean, completely clean.
In the United States, it's pretty safe.
It's very safe. There has never been a death in the United States from nuclear power. Never. And so per kilowatt, it's actually the safest because people fall off roofs installing solar, for instance. So there's more deaths from solar than there is from nuclear in the history of the United States. Much more. It is affordable. The current plants online are affordable, but expanding capacity, building new plants is not yet affordable. And we need to make it affordable and realistic. And that's something I've worked on in the legislature. I passed a law a couple of years ago that I think will help make it more affordable when it does become more commercially realistic. This is probably one of the issues where, to your point, it's not become as, shall I say, radioactive a topic.
He's a jokester.
The governor and I probably have exact same outlook on this issue. We're pro-nuclear. We want Millstone to stay, and we hope it actually is able to expand in the future.
Okay. All right. And you have said over and over you want your voters to hold you accountable for what you're saying on the campaign trail, which is huge because there's a lot of people out there that just say a lot. How do you want your voters to keep you accountable?
They should check, what I say and what I promise, that it is realistic. They should ask me the hard questions. And when I'm running for re-election in 4 or 5 years, they should check that the promises I made were ones that I followed through on or did my damnedest to follow through on. There's some things that will be difficult to get through the legislature, but I am promising what I am confident can be delivered. I'm not promising the moon and the stars, but I am promising a better future for our state. And I'm so confident in what I am promising that I want voters to hold me accountable, to ask the hard questions, and in 4 years to judge me based on the standard I set for myself. Governor Lamont promised to turn the moving vans around. He hasn't. He should be held accountable. The best way to improve our politics is to hold the people who have been put in those positions of power to account by at least their own standards.
Awesome.
All right, we're in the final countdown, the last 3 questions. Why should a voter who's never voted Republican vote for you?
I think that the current class of leadership has so clearly failed Connecticut residents and failed every Connecticut resident. Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is, shall we say, unwise. And I am running to bring everybody together, to solve everybody's problems, to make our state affordable, to create opportunity, to ensure that there is safety, and make our government accountable. It is not a left or right argument. It is a common sense versus ideology argument. And I will run to be the governor for all people, and I will govern to be the leader for all people. That's how I've worked in the Senate, and I'm confident I could do that in the executive branch as well.
When you get to go and debate good old Ned on whenever that happens, I don't know dates that those go on, but what is one question that you want the media to ask both of you that you really want him to answer?
He should be held accountable for his record, and it's just total incongruence with his rhetoric. He promised to cut taxes, but he's raised taxes. He's promised to turn the moving vans around, but he hasn't. He's promised to make energy more affordable, but he's presided over an increase in the public benefits fees and defends them still today. I am not running against Ned the person. I'm running against Ned the record. I'm running against the entire state legislature and its failures. It's not personal, but it does matter for the daily lives of all Connecticut residents who need a government that works. So I want him to be held accountable for his record, his tax increases, his increases in public benefits fees, and presiding over a stagnant economy.
All right. Well, last question. What do you want Connecticut residents to know about you that has not been brought up yet?
This is kind of, what I'm showing on the campaign trail is who I am. I want to solve problems. I want to help lead this state. I care about the state, and I know it can be fixed. I'm not going to be the most charismatic. I'm not going to be the biggest personality on the campaign trail, but this is from the heart, and this entire campaign will be from the heart. And it comes from a place of hope and belief that the state can do better. This is my home. It's the only place I've ever called home, and I think it's worth fighting for.
I have a real quickie. So after election, if you don't make governor, God, I really hope you do, you've lost your senator seat, right?
Correct.
Because you're trading it off.
Yes, same cycle.
Okay.
So I had to choose one or the other. And that was a tough decision because I love my job in the Senate and I feel honored to have it. But this is a task worth taking on.
Well, you're a reasonable voice. I don't want this. I think it will be a huge loss for Connecticut to lose you. So hopefully they will keep that in mind when they go into the voting booth.
I hope so too. But no matter what, I'm never going away.
That's awesome. I like to hear it.
So people that want to support you, how do they do that?
Please visit us at ryanfazio.com. You can sign up, to stay on our alerts or to volunteer. And please follow us and share on social media. On Instagram, we're Ryan Fazio CT. On Facebook, we're Ryan Fazio. On Twitter, we're Ryan Fazio. On TikTok, we're Ryan Fazio CT. I don't do any dances on TikTok, but we're trying to be a little more interesting than we have been.
I think you're in Bristol next week at the RTC meet or pizza in Bristol, something
He's
like
probably
that.
going, I don't know.
I honestly was going to say, I don't know. I know what I'm doing like tomorrow. And then I leave the rest to my much more sophisticated team.
You are going to RTC.
I am going to Bristol soon.
Yep,
I wish I knew.
By the time this is out,
I probably will have been.
But you're going to RTC meetings. You're doing events.
Yes.
All of them. I've seen a lot of them on Facebook. I'm on Facebook a lot, so
when it's meet and greets, I've been seeing the meet and greets pop up.
And if you want to host a meet and greet, go to our website and message us. We'd love to do a meet and greet. I'm all campaigning all the time, meeting people, listening to people, and spreading our message. I'll take questions clearly for a long time and in an open-ended manner. So, please get in touch with us.
All right. Well, we appreciate you coming on to the podcast, and hopefully all the viewers do too. You are definitely welcome to come back anytime you would like.
Yes. Like this summer, if you want to
after
come back
session.
and when things start getting a little heated up, I'd be happy to have you guys back or have, you back. I say
Thank
you guys because I talked to Pam.
No, thank you both for having me. This has been a really great hour, and I'd love to come back.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it. Well, thank you, Ryan, for coming on to the podcast. My name's Josh.
And I'm Michelle.
And we'll see you guys next time.
Bye.
Lock and Load Podcast is sponsored by Lock and Load Firearms, Connecticut's #1 rated gun store and pistol permit class on Google. Come check us out, 1573 Meriden Waterbury Turnpike in Southington. Lock and Load Firearms.
Lock and Load Podcast is also sponsored by Patriot Wear Holsters, custom-made Kydex holsters locally made in Waterbury, Connecticut. www.patriotwearholster.com and use code LNL Podcast for 10% off your purchase. Orders available for shipping or pickup at various locations.